You weren't crazy. You were being conditioned to doubt your own reality. Every time you tried to speak your truth, they twisted it. Every time you reacted to something that hurt, they made you the problem. And slowly, you started questioning your own memory, your own feelings, your own sanity. That's not love. That's psychological warfare disguised as care. You kept asking yourself, is it me? But deep down, something didn't feel right. That confusion wasn't weakness. It was a sign that your nervous system was screaming for clarity in a world built on emotional manipulation. If you've ever felt lost in a relationship that looked fine on the outside but destroyed you on the inside, this video is for you. You constantly questioned your memory because they denied things they clearly said or did. They didn't need to scream to make you feel insane. All they had to do was calmly deny what you knew was true. You remember what they said, you remember how they acted, but when you brought it up, they acted like you imagined it. They looked you in the eye and rewrote the scene like it never happened. And the worst part, they did it so convincingly that you started to doubt yourself. You began questioning your memory, your perception, even your sanity. You replayed conversations over and over in your mind, wondering if you misheard, misunderstood, or overreacted. That confusion wasn't an accident, it was gaslighting, and it worked. Not because you were weak, but because you trusted them, because you gave them the benefit of the doubt, and they used that trust to manipulate your reality, slowly convincing you that the problem wasn't them, it was you. They twisted your words to make you feel guilty for reacting to their abuse. They didn't just hurt you, they made you feel guilty for being hurt. Every time you tried to speak up, they flipped the script. Suddenly, you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too unforgiving. You started second-guessing your reactions, wondering if maybe you were overreacting. They made your pain feel like a character flaw, and the more they twisted your words, the more careful you became, not to protect yourself, but to avoid upsetting them. To protect your words, even though you were insane. Not to protect yourself, but to avoid upsetting them. To protect your words, to already protect yourself, but to avoid upsetting them. You weren't allowed to express anger, disappointment, or even confusion without it being turned against you, so you shrank, you tiptoed, you stayed quiet. And all of it trained you to believe that your feelings were the problem, not the abuse itself. That kind of manipulation doesn't just silence your voice, it chips away at your sense of self, until one day you can't even recognize who you were before they taught you to apologize for your own pain. You were blamed for everything. Even their own toxic behavior were the one who ended up apologizing. They spun every situation to make themselves the victim and you the villain. If they were cold, it was because you were too emotional. If they exploded, it was because you pushed them too far. Over time, you stopped expecting accountability from them and started expecting blame. You learned to walk on eggshells just to avoid another emotional ambush. And the worst part? You started to believe it. You began internalizing the idea that if only you were more patient, more perfect, more quiet, they would be better. But the truth is, you were never the problem. Their behavior was. They just needed someone else to carry the guilt they refused to face. And you, being empathic and self-aware, became their easiest target. They made you feel selfish for having normal emotional needs. You weren't asking for too much, you were asking for the basics. Honesty, consistency, kindness, respect. But with a narcissist, even the most human emotional needs are twisted into evidence that you're needy, dramatic, or never satisfied. Every time you expressed hurt or asked for clarity, they painted you as the problem. They made you feel like your needs were a burden, like you should be grateful just to be tolerated. Over time, you stopped bringing things up. You told yourself to be less sensitive or stop overthinking, even when your gut was screaming that something wasn't right. You minimized your pain just to maintain the peace, until your self-worth started slipping through the cracks. And that's the trap. The more invisible you become, the easier it is for them to stay unaccountable. But your emotional needs were never selfish. You were just in a space that punished you for having them. You apologized just to keep the peace, even when you weren't wrong. You found yourself saying, "I'm sorry," even when you had no idea what you did wrong, because the silence, the coldness, or the sudden shift in their mood felt worse than admitting fault you didn't cause. Over time, apologizing became survival. You learned that owning blame was the quickest way to avoid conflict, to end the argument, to get them to stop shutting you out. You weren't apologizing out of guilt. You were doing it to regain some kind of emotional balance in a relationship that constantly kept you off center. But every time you did that, you chipped away a little more at your own truth, your own boundaries. You taught yourself that harmony was more important than self-respect, and the cost of peace was you. But deep down you knew, peace that requires betrayal of self isn't peace at all. It's control disguised as calm. You felt like you were walking on eggshells, afraid of setting them off. You adjusted your tone, your words, even your facial expressions, just to avoid triggering their next outburst. It wasn't just about keeping the peace, it was about survival. You started second-guessing everything before you said it, wondering, will this upset them? Will they twist this into something it's not? You filtered yourself so much that you forgot what it felt like to speak freely. Over time, you weren't just walking on eggshells, you were living in a mental minefield. And what made it worse, they acted like you were the sensitive one, like your fear, your anxiety, your silence was the real problem. But it wasn't. You were reacting to emotional unpredictability, to manipulation disguised as passion, to anger that always felt one step too close. The eggshells weren't your fault. You didn't break them. You just learned how to survive around someone who refused to take responsibility for the mess they made. They praised you just enough to keep you confused and tied to them. They knew exactly when to say the right thing, not out of love, but out of control. Just when you were about to walk away, they'd throw you a compliment, a memory, or a moment of warmth that made you second-guess everything. Maybe they do care, maybe it's not always this bad. That flicker of hope was intentional. It wasn't affection, it was manipulation. By feeding you crumbs of praise, they kept you starving for validation. And every time you tried to pull away, they used those crumbs to reel you back in. You started to believe that the problem was your inability to appreciate the good moments. But deep down, you felt those good moments were calculated, they weren't real connection, they were bait. And the confusion you felt, that was the trap. A cycle designed to make you stay, even when your soul was screaming to run. You lost trust in your own feelings because they made you feel too sensitive or over-dramatic. At some point, you stopped trusting your own emotions, not because they were wrong, but because they were constantly dismissed. Every time you spoke up about something that hurt you, they labeled you as too sensitive or overreacting. And over time, you started to internalize it. You began second-guessing how you felt, wondering if you were just being dramatic. You've silenced yourself before they even had to. That's how deep it got. You didn't just doubt them, you doubted yourself. That's what emotional manipulation does. It slowly erodes your inner compass until you're no longer sure what's real, what's fair, or what's worth defending. And the saddest part? You started believing that your ability to feel deeply was a flaw, when in truth it was your greatest strength. One they couldn't handle, so they had to break it down. Every time you tried to leave, they pulled you back with fake remorse or guilt. Every time you gathered the strength to walk away, they sensed it. And that's when the performance began. Suddenly they'd act remorseful, like they finally saw your pain, like they cared. Maybe they cried, maybe they apologized, maybe they promised to change, or worse, they flipped it on you, making you feel guilty for even thinking about leaving. They'd remind you of the good times, the sacrifices they made, the things they claimed no one else would ever do for you. And in that vulnerable moment, you'd question everything again. You'd wonder if maybe you were giving up too soon, if maybe this time would be different. That push and pull wasn't love, it was control. They never truly wanted to change, they just didn't want to lose the power they had over you. And the longer you stayed, the more tangled you became in the lie that leaving meant you were cruel, when really, leaving was the first act of self-love. You felt emotionally exhausted, not because you were weak, but because your reality was constantly invalidated. You weren't tired because you were weak, you were tired because you were constantly fighting to prove your reality. Every time you brought up something that hurt, they downplayed it, denied it, or turned it back on you. You began second-guessing your instincts, questioning your emotions, and editing yourself before you even spoke. That kind of emotional gymnastics drains you slowly and quietly. It's not just exhaustion, it's erosion. Your truth was dismissed so often that you started dismissing it yourself. That's why you felt so lost, so confused, so numb. You weren't imagining the pain. You were living in a world where your pain wasn't allowed to exist. And over time, that kills a part of you. But what you need to know now is this. The exhaustion you felt wasn't a weakness. It was the weight of carrying a truth no one else would validate, and recognizing that truth is the first step back to yourself. If any part of this felt like your story, know this. You're not alone, and you're not crazy. You were gaslit, manipulated, and made to doubt your own reality. But you're waking up now. Keep listening to that quiet voice inside you. It's your truth trying to come back to life. If this helped you feel seen, come back when you need clarity, and consider subscribing so you don't have to walk this healing journey alone.